This story was sent by a viewer who wishes to remain anonymous. After hearing this story, you might stay silent for a few seconds. No more talking. Let's start the story. I was 12 years old, alone in my house, and something knocked on my back door at 2 in the morning. The night of October 14, 2019, in Glendale, Arizona, began quietly. The air was entirely still, hanging heavy over the concrete drainage wash behind our property. I lived in a typical single-story ranch home. Up until that night, my parents had never left me alone overnight. Never. But a sudden phone call from the hospital changed everything. My grandmother had taken a serious fall in Tucson. With my older brother away and unreachable at a college party, my parents had to make a difficult choice. I was going to be completely alone in the house. As the sun dipped below the horizon, it cast long, dark shadows across the desert landscaping in the backyard. Inside, the house felt entirely too big, too empty. Every creak of the floorboards echoed just a little louder than usual. The silence started to settle in. At 9 p.m., my dad double-checked every single lock before they pulled out of the driveway. Their headlights swept across the living room walls, and then they were gone. By 11 p.m., I turned off the TV. The silence of the house rushed in to fill the void. At 11:30, I drifted off to sleep. The house was locked tight. I was safe. Until 2:07 a.m. My eyes snapped open. I was jolted wide awake. My body lay completely frozen under the covers, but my mind was suddenly racing. As I lay there in the dark, I thought about the back door. Just before my parents left, my dad did something strange. He had this quirky habit he'd picked up from watching old suspense movies. He took a heavy wooden kitchen chair, carried it over to the door, and wedged the back of it firmly under the handle. Just a simple chair, braced tight against the floorboards. I strained my ears, listening to the dark house. I wasn't entirely alone. Cooper, our family beagle, was asleep at the foot of my bed. Usually Cooper was my early warning system. Normally, Cooper barked at absolutely everything. Squirrels on the fence, the mailman, plastic bags blowing in the wind down the street. He had no filter whatsoever. But at 2:07 a.m., Cooper wasn't barking. I looked down at the foot of the bed in the dark. He was sitting straight up, completely rigid. His eyes were wide, staring intently at the closed bedroom door. He wasn't growling. He wasn't making a single sound. In 6 years, I had never seen him go silent in the face of something unfamiliar. His unnatural, paralyzed silence, that terrified me far more than whatever had just woken me up. The house was pitch black. Outside, the night was completely dead. The stillness was suffocating. My loud, fearless dog was paralyzed with absolute terror. And then, a sound echoed from the back of the house. Knock, knock, knock. 3 distinct strikes on the back door glass. They weren't frantic, they weren't aggressive or rushed. They were incredibly slow, methodical, deliberate. The unhurried, calm pace of that sound crawled under my skin. Whoever was standing out there in the dark, they felt completely in control. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, my fingers trembling. I wanted to call my mom, but I hesitated. What if it was just the wind? What if I caused a panic while she was at the hospital? I held my breath. I decided to wait. 1 second, 10 seconds, a full 20 seconds passed in agonizing, heavy silence. 20 seconds feels like an absolute eternity when you are trapped in the dark. And then, the exact same slow, even sound repeated. Knock, knock, knock. It wasn't the wind. Someone was out there, and they were in no hurry at all. Shaking uncontrollably, I crept out of my bed. The floorboards were freezing against my bare feet. I slowly peered down the short hallway into the kitchen. The pale yellow light above the stove was still on, casting a dim glow over that wooden kitchen chair wedged under the handle. But right above it, through the narrow, rectangular window in the center of the back door, I saw it, a shape, a tall silhouette lit only by the faint reflection of the neighbor's porch light bouncing off the concrete wash. It was standing entirely too close to the glass, perfectly, unnaturally motionless. I clutched the phone and dialed. The second my mom picked up, I barely breathed the words into the receiver. "Mom, someone's at the back door." I could hear the absolute dread in her voice. She knew instantly. She told me to stay perfectly still. Don't move, don't make a sound. She was using my dad's phone to dial 911 right then.
I stood frozen in that dark hallway for 4 agonizing minutes. Cooper was pressed tightly against my leg, trembling. I just kept watching that unmoving silhouette staring back through the glass.
The standoff stretched on, every second pulling the air from my lungs. Then, the distant rising wail of police sirens pierced the night air. In the blink of an eye, the dark shape at the door just vanished, swallowed back into the blackness. When the Glendale police arrived, they swept the property with flashlights, peeling back the layers of the dark to see what had been out there.
The beams of their flashlights caught something deeply disturbing in the mud along the concrete drainage wash. Heavy boot prints. The intruder had crept up directly from the wash, walking straight across the yard to the back door, and then vanished back the exact same way. But the police found something else. Those same heavy boot prints were found lingering directly under my parents' bedroom window, pressed deep into the earth. Whoever it was, they had been standing there, watching the house. They watched my parents leave. They knew a 12-year-old girl was inside, completely alone.
They had waited in the dark for hours. They waited until 2 a.m., making absolutely sure the house was completely asleep. They didn't just try the handle and leave, they stood at the glass.
The slow pacing of those knocks, it was bait. A cruel, calculated game. They were testing the waters, standing out there in the cold, waiting to see if a terrified, panicked child would be naive enough to just walk up and pull the handle, waiting to see if the door would swing open. If it weren't for that single wooden chair wedged under the lock and the paralyzed silence of a dog that knew better, I don't know what would have happened.
The police never caught the man in the dark. The heavy boot prints eventually washed away with the rain, and the silhouette simply melted back into the Arizona night, never to be seen again, leaving only the echo of 3 slow knocks and the terrifying unanswered question, who was on the other side of that door? Please remember to comment and share your thoughts below. If you found this story compelling, be sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more. Moving on to the next one. This story was sent by a viewer who wishes to remain anonymous. The incident is so strange that it's hard to tell whether it was real or just a nightmare. No more talking. Let's start the story. My name is Caleb Morrison. We lived in an old 2-story colonial on Elmwood Avenue. It was the kind of house that always made noise. But there is a fragile illusion of safety in those familiar sounds, an illusion that was completely shattered for my family on one freezing night in Burlington, Vermont. What I heard at 10:22 p.m. was not the house settling. We all know the normal sounds of our own homes, right? The sudden hum of the refrigerator, the sharp pop of the floorboards expanding in the cold. But at that exact moment, the baseline shifted. The sounds I heard weren't the house. They were something else. It was March 3rd, 2021. Up in Vermont, March isn't spring. It's the brutal, heavy, gray, bitter tail end of winter. A massive snowstorm was rolling in, burying our neighborhood. The wind howled against the wooden bones of the house, amplifying every draft in the hallways and every creak in the hardwood floors. We were completely isolated by the ice and the snow. At 7:30 p.m., my 8-year-old sister, Maya, was running a high fever. I carried her upstairs, tucked her into bed, and pulled her door mostly shut. By 9, the blizzard outside had turned violent. My parents had gone to a dinner 40 minutes away in St. Albans, and the roads were impassable. Mom texted me to lock up. They were snowed in, they weren't coming home. I went around and locked the front door, the back door, the garage. I thought we were secure. I was only 14 years old, just a kid, entirely cut off from my parents by a winter storm, tasked with protecting my sick little sister. The weight of that quiet, empty house was heavy. It was just the 2 of us against the storm outside. But the storm wasn't what I needed to be afraid of. Every house has an acoustic fingerprint. I knew ours perfectly. A high-pitched groan meant someone was near the upstairs bathroom. A hollow thud meant someone was walking past my bedroom. But then, the 10:22 sound started. Slow, deliberate, footsteps, starting at the very top of the stairs. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't a random settling of wood. It was a measured cadence, moving sequentially down the hallway, straight toward Maya's room. Your mind tries to protect you. It grasps for the most rational explanation. I froze on the downstairs couch, staring up into the dark stairwell, and called out, "Maya, you okay?" I assumed her fever had broken and she had gotten out of bed. But the moment my voice echoed up the stairs, the footsteps abruptly stopped. Dead silence. If it was Maya, she would have answered me. Whatever was standing in that hallway had heard me, reacted to my voice, and made a conscious choice to freeze. 10 agonizing minutes dragged by in total silence. And then, the slow, measured walk began again, creeping closer to Maya's door. I couldn't wait anymore. I rushed to the bottom of the stairs, my hand trembling as I flipped the pale yellow hallway light switch and bolted up the steps. The hallway was empty, completely empty. But the blood drained from my face when I looked at Maya's room. I knew I had pulled it mostly shut when I tucked her in. Now, it was standing wide open. I rushed in. Maya was fast asleep, her fever breaking, totally untouched. I backed out, trying to convince myself it was just old hinges and the uneven floors. I retreated back downstairs to the couch. 10:22 was the first sound. 10:32 was when I checked on her. Now, I sat there with my phone clutched in my hand, swallowed by the grueling silence of the house, waiting, listening. And then, at 11:08 p.m., the nightmare became undeniable. The sound changed. It wasn't footsteps pacing the hall anymore. Drifting down from the ceiling above me was something deeply, viscerally disturbing. A sound somewhere between heavy breathing and a low, continuous hum. It was rhythmic, patient. It sounded like someone who was in absolutely no rush, just waiting in the dark. Panic seized my chest. I dialed my dad. Through the static of the storm, he didn't dismiss me. He told me to keep the police on the line and go get Maya, now. I turned on my phone flashlight. I had to walk back up those stairs and down that freezing pitch-black hallway. I slipped into her room, scooped up my groggy, confused sister, and held her tight against my chest. As I stepped back out into the hallway, an overwhelming primal instinct screamed at me from deep within my gut. Do not look behind you. Whatever you do, do not look back. I carried her toward the stairs, staring straight ahead, fighting every fiber of my being that felt eyes burning into my back. 12 minutes. That's how long it took for the Burlington police to arrive through the blizzard. 12 agonizing minutes, huddled on the living room couch by the front door, holding Maya. I had turned on every single light on the first floor, but the upstairs remained completely dark. We just sat there, listening to the suffocating silence, knowing that a threat was hovering in the architecture right above our heads. When the police finally kicked the snow off their boots and came inside, they drew their flashlights and began a systematic sweep. They cleared the basement, empty. They checked every ground floor room and every upstairs closet. Nothing. But then they moved out into the upstairs hallway and looked up, the square cut of the ceiling access panel leading to the attic. They pushed the panel up, shined their heavy flashlights into the pitch-black crawl space, and found the source of the noise. Up in the darkness, the beam of the flashlight illuminated the terrifying reality. There was a cleared space in decades of undisturbed dust, right near the access panel. Next to it, distinct, heavy shoe prints were pressed deep into the loose fiberglass insulation. But the most chilling discovery was near the far wall. Directly above my 8-year-old sister's bed, someone had carved a small, deliberate hole completely through the drywall, sized perfectly to lay down and watch her sleep. I had locked every door, every window, but there was an exterior ventilation grate high up on the side of our old colonial. The police found it had been pried loose from the outside. They never came through the ground floor. They climbed the side of the house in the storm and slipped directly into the attic. They had been living right above us, hidden away in the dark, breathing quietly in the infrastructure of our own home. But the sheer horror of it didn't fully set in until the police finished their sweep. The disturbed insulation covered way too wide an area for just one night. The sheer volume of flattened fiberglass and tracked-in dirt proved this wasn't an isolated break-in to escape the snowstorm. Whoever it was had been coming back, repeatedly, using that hidden grate to slip in and out over an extended period of time. We had been living underneath a watcher, totally blind to the fact that we were never actually alone. 4 months later, my parents packed up all our belongings and we moved away from Elmwood Avenue forever. The police took the shoe prints. They investigated the grate, but there was never an arrest. The identity of the person crawling around in the dark above my sister's bedroom and what they ultimately wanted with us remains a completely unsolved mystery. We just left, carrying the heavy trauma of that winter night with us. Maya is 15 now, but the memory of that night still haunts me. I still lie awake sometimes, staring at the ceiling, thinking about that agonizing walk down the hallway. When I was carrying her out of her room, guided only by the dim light of my phone, what was standing in the darkness behind me?
What primal instinct protected me from turning around, and what would have happened if I did? If you enjoyed this story, please like this video, leave a comment down below, and subscribe to our channel for more.
Moving on to the next one. This story was sent by a viewer who wishes to remain anonymous. After this incident, he reportedly didn't turn off his lights for several days. No more talking. Let's start the story.
I am not the kind of person who panics. By the time I was 17, I thought I had a pretty solid handle on what was real. Savannah Cole was raised in Knoxville, Tennessee, the only girl in a house with 3 brothers.
She was dragged into the dark woods, dared to jump from high places, and taught to never show fear. There was no room for a wild imagination, no tolerance for panic. When she tells you she knew what was real, you believe her.
The Cole family lived on Halston Hills Drive, in a heavy brick house built in 1957. Her father poured his soul into it.
His pride was the basement, a pristine woodworking shop filled with heavy table saws and the sharp scent of sawdust. But separating that basement from the kitchen above was an original solid wood door. And on the kitchen side was a thick, heavy iron slide bolt. It was kept locked, always, to keep her wandering 9-year-old brother Tyler away from the dangerous blades. Sliding that cold iron bolt shut was as automatic as breathing. The door was always secured from the inside. Always.
July 19th, 2023. A sweltering, sticky Tennessee evening. Her parents and little brother had driven down to Chattanooga. Her older brothers were miles away, working out of state. For the very first time in her 17 years, Savannah was completely alone in the heavy brick house. She ordered pizza, painted her nails. It was a perfectly ordinary night. She slipped into bed at 10:30, the hum of the window AC pulling her effortlessly into a deep, dreamless sleep.
But the ordinary shatters in the dark.
She didn't wake up slowly. Her eyes snapped open in the pitch black. Every nerve ending in her body ignited instantly, screaming a silent alarm before her brain could even process why. The clock glowed, 1:33 a.m. For 30 seconds, the house was a tomb, dead quiet, just the rattling AC unit. She closed her eyes, willing herself back to sleep. And then, at 1:34 a.m., the sound began, directly beneath her bedroom floor, down in her father's workshop.
The mind lies to protect itself. Savannah's brain whispered that it was just a raccoon stuck in the vent. But a trapped animal is frantic, chaotic, claws scratching wildly in a panic. The sound bleeding through the floorboards was the exact opposite. It was a slow, deliberate drag. Something massive and impossibly heavy scraping intentionally across the bare concrete. A long, agonizing drag. Then silence. 15 seconds would pass, then another drag. The calculated, unhurried rhythm of something immense.
The air in her bedroom turned to ice.
Savannah sat paralyzed on the edge of her bed, her phone clutched in a sweating grip. She breathed slowly, silently through her nose, fighting the pounding in her chest. She almost stood up, almost convinced herself to walk down the dark hallway and check the basement door. But then, the sound changed. From beneath her, she heard the heavy wood of the basement door being pushed, hard, against its frame. Thud. Someone was testing the lock, the very lock she had bolted closed hours ago. Raw, freezing instinct possessed her. She didn't dare call her mother. Any sound would be a beacon to whoever was down there. She dialed 911, pressing the phone against her lips, barely whispering her address. Without a sound, she pushed her bedroom door shut, pressing her spine into the darkest corner of the room, out of sight from the window, staring at her own bedroom door, waiting.
In the suffocating blackness, the sounds below continued. Slow, muffled footsteps pacing on concrete. And then, twice more, that firm, testing pressure against the locked basement door. Thud. They weren't throwing their weight against it. They weren't frantically trying to splinter the wood. They were patient, methodical, testing the resistance, moving through a dark, calculated plan, step by step. That cold patience, that unhurried, silent confidence in the dark, was a terror deeper than any violent, chaotic break-in.
Time lost all meaning in that corner. 6 agonizing minutes ticked by on her phone's glowing screen. Then, headlights sliced through the trees outside. Sirens wailed down Halston Hills Drive. And in that exact second, the basement went completely, utterly silent, like a breath suddenly held in the dark. Whoever was down there heard the approaching sirens. When the police finally cleared the house, guns drawn, sweeping flashlights through the sawdust of the workshop, there was no one.
The basement was empty. But the truth they uncovered was infinitely worse. A small, ground-level window at the back of the house had been breached. The intruder hadn't smashed the glass. They had slid a whisper-thin piece of metal through a tiny gap in the 1957 seal, silently unlatching it. But they didn't just climb into the basement. They hoisted themselves up into the claustrophobic space above the drop ceiling. And they waited.
When deputies shined their flashlights up into the stifling, fiberglass-filled dark of that crawlspace, right directly beneath the kitchen floorboards, they found them, deep, perfectly defined knee prints pressed into decades of thick, gray dust.
The intruder had been inside the house since the early evening. They had crawled across the ceiling joists, positioning themselves directly over the kitchen door. They had knelt there, in the suffocating heat, pressing their ear to the floorboards, and listened. Listened as a 17-year-old girl walked into the kitchen, slid the heavy iron bolt closed, and turned off the lights. They knew she was alone. They knew her only barrier was that bolted door. And they simply stayed there, in the dark, sweltering July heat, for hours, waiting with absolute, terrifying patience for her to fall into a sleep so deep she wouldn't hear them finally drop down into the workshop. When the sirens screamed, they vanished out the back window and into the thick, wooded lot behind the house. Only their boot prints remained in the mud, dissolving into the night. They were never found.
The shadows still linger in that house. The intruder had calculated every single variable: the ancient window latch, the hidden space above the drop ceiling, the bolted door, the precise timing of the night. But there was one thing they couldn't calculate. What pulled Savannah out of a dead sleep at exactly 1:33 a.m.? Remember the silence. The heavy dragging on the concrete didn't begin until she was already awake. There was no noise, no creaking floorboards, nothing. Yet her body triggered a massive adrenaline spike, waking her up mere seconds before the nightmare began. It was an invisible, ancient tripwire in the human mind, a primal alarm that senses the breathing of a predator in the dark, long before logic can explain it.
If something wakes you up in the middle of the night and you don't know why, Savannah says now, don't roll over. Don't pull the blanket up and close your eyes. Lie completely still. Stay quiet and listen like your life depends on it, because sometimes it does. If you survived this story with us, comment and share your thoughts below. Like this video and subscribe our channel for more tales from the dark.
You can also send us your true horror stories. If you've experienced something terrifying yourself, or if something scary happened to your family members, relatives, or friends, share it with us. Real paranormal experiences, creepy incidents, unexplained events, or any disturbing true story are welcome. Send your true horror stories in this email.